First of all, I must say, it's a great honor for me to be here. I feel overwhelming gratitude for having been invited to speak at this conference. I want to say a few words, first of all, about the staff of this program. I've traveled the world extensively for the last 20 years. Actually, I've traveled the world extensively for the last 50 years. I've been at conferences here and there, Tokyo, Brazil, Iceland, everywhere. I have never encountered a professional staff to equal the one that I have run into here at this conference. The young men and women who have put this together are so outstanding. They're incredible people. They're not only brilliant, but they're warm, they're loving, they're caring and supportive. And I want you to give them a big hand. I also want to make a small comment directed to the Spanish gentleman in the audience. I've traveled everywhere. Spain impresses me. This country is beautiful. You have a tremendous history. My God, you have heroes, you have kings, you have saints. The magnificent history of the Spanish people. You have much to be proud of. But for you gentlemen here, the Spanish gentlemen in the audience, you have a treasure. My God, it's Spanish women. Some of the most beautiful people, most beautiful women I have ever encountered are right here in Spain. So, amigos, treasure your ladies, protect them with care. Okay, thank you. That's all I needed to say about that. I am a bit of an anomaly, I think. I think of where I've been, what I've seen, what I've done, and sometimes I end up in a state of shock. I was on the telephone with my son just 2 or 3 weeks ago. My son is a retired Navy captain, spent 30 years on active duty in the United States Navy. And I said to him, Eric, when I'm depressed and I'm sad and I'm worn down, I sometimes get the impression that I'm a walking example of the old Chinese curse. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. This old Chinese curse goes back thousands of years. And it says essentially, may you live in interesting times. And I think of myself sometimes as an example of that. I have served in 3 wars. I've had 3 professions, careers. I have had 3 marriages. And I pause and I look at my second marriage and I think, make that 4 wars I've served in. Not just 3, but 4. I think I have some... Computers ready? Okay, well, I'm not there just yet. I've got to give you a little history and I have to give you a little background because many of you people were not born when I began my journey. I was assigned to Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe in 1963. I was a young master sergeant and I was able to apply for and receive this choice assignment to go to Paris. At that time, SHAPE Headquarters, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe, was located at a little town called Roquencourt outside of Paris. I arrived in the summer of 1963. I was immediately immediately assigned to a place we called SHOC, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. Now, when I arrived, I had a top secret clearance. You had to have a top secret clearance to get assigned to SHAPE. When I got there, my top secret clearance was upgraded to cosmic top secret. Was and still is the highest level of security classification in NATO. You had to have that to work in SHOC, the war room. I learned of a study that was underway. The study was titled An Assessment. It seems that on the 2nd of February, 1961, World War III almost began. It happened this way. Large numbers of circular metallic objects were flying from the Soviet sector, from the Warsaw Pact, over a divided Germany. They were flying toward the west. They were very high, they were in formation, and they were very obviously under intelligent control. The Soviets went on alert. The NATO forces went on alert. There we were in those years with our fingers on the triggers and our thumbs poised above the red buttons. And World War III, as I said, were just moments away. We learned that the Soviets thought those objects belonged to us, and for a time we thought those objects might belong to the Soviets. We were to learn later that they didn't belong to any of us. Those objects flew toward the west, over the Channel, over the southern coast of England. They turned north over the English Channel, and they disappeared off of NATO radar over the Norwegian Sea. It was over in 20 minutes. An air marshal by the name of Sir Thomas Pike, who was the deputy supreme Allied commander in Europe at that time, said, "We can't have this. We cannot allow this. We've got to find out what the hell is going on here. Who are they? What the hell are they doing here? And why are they doing the things they're doing?" And so he initiated a study in 1961. I arrived in 63. The study was completed, published in the summer of 1964, and I'm working in the war room. I read it, I studied it, I couldn't put it down, I couldn't walk away from it. Every time I was on duty in SHOC, I would take it out of the vault and I would read it again and again and again, and my life has not been the same since. Now, when it was published in 64, it concluded, apparently there was not a threat to Allied forces in Europe. They determined that there were apparently 4 different civilizations coming, going planet Earth. They determined that these civilizations had been coming and going here for hundreds, if not thousands of years. As I said, they determined that there apparently was no threat involved because the repeated demonstrations of incredibly advanced technology indicated to our military people in 64 that if they had been malevolent or hostile, it would have all been over a long time ago. They also concluded that there was a program underway. There was a plan taking place. Something was happening. Something was developing. They didn't know then in 64 what it was. I became so obsessed with what I read that I launched myself on the career that has led me here in front of you today. Ladies and gentlemen, my life has changed so completely over the years. The more I learned, as I said, I've been places I should not have been over the years. I've done things I should not have done. I've seen and learned things that, looking back, I wish to God maybe I had never seen or learned in the first place. If I could go back, and look at what was ahead of me, I might not have even started that journey. Because that journey has been filled with heartbreak and pain, loss of love, ridicule, threats. I mean threats to my life. But I couldn't walk away. I couldn't leave it alone. I couldn't stand back from it, because the implications and the ramifications of what I had learned in '64 was such a beginning. What happened to me over the years is literally my old world view, my old paradigm. It collapsed around me, collapsed in ruins, dust around my feet, my knees. I lost my old world view. I lost my comfort. I lost the cocoon of comfort that I had lived in all those years. We all have a paradigm. We all have a worldview. It literally is who we are. It's how we came to be, what we think, what we do. It's in here, it's in our hearts. Mine collapsed of what I had seen and what I had learned. The analogy I will give you, it's like standing naked and alone on a cold, dark night under a billion stars. And you look up and you say, my God, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Is there a meaning or is there a purpose in my life? Now, when you lose your paradigm, that's the kind of thing that happens to you. I was forced to rebuild my paradigm, my worldview, and I've been relatively successful at it. Not totally, but relatively so. But the things I've seen and the things I've learned, and I will tell you essentially that for me, what I'm discussing with you this afternoon or this morning is the greatest story in human history. It essentially is the greatest story of human history. It involves a fact. One of the advanced extraterrestrial civilizations that has been coming here from the beginning of time literally genetically engineered the human race 200,000 years ago at least. They manipulated us genetically from a lower form that existed apparently on the plains of Central Africa. They took that biped, that upright, hairy, I think they compared it to what the biologists call Australopithecus. They engineered, re-engineered, manipulated genetically that creature, and they created Homo sapiens. Now here's something that you must consider. That genetic manipulation is still going on today. It has not ceased. It's still taking place. We have learned that there were not just 4 groups coming. When I retired from the military in 1976, we knew at least of a dozen. I've heard estimates from people that I trust, experts, that there could be 100 or more. Intelligent, advanced races coming here. We also have learned that this was not merely visitation from another planet. You know, interplanetary. If it had been merely that, if it had been that we were being visited by an intelligent species from another planet, or even another star system, this would have been out a long time ago. But we've learned that some of them are not only merely interplanetary, they're interstellar, they're intergalactic, and by 1976, our military and our security people in the United States determined that some of them were apparently multidimensional. Now, this really blew our scientists out of the water. There had been talk and theories back in those days about other dimensions. But here we have intelligences coming, intelligences being here from other dimensions, other planets, other star systems, and other galaxies. And the question arises, and the question has been foremost in our minds, among the military and among the intelligence people. Where are we going with this? What's really happening? The evidence has accrued is that the human race apparently is in the midst of a transition. And I say it's more than that. We are indeed in transit. But what I have determined is it's not merely our transition. We are undergoing what I call a transcendent transformation into another species. We are literally turning in to another form of life. And we are being assisted, we are being guided, we are being watched, we are being monitored, and we are being given first-hand help through the difficulty and the pain of this transition. Ladies and gentlemen, they're not only here, they're in our midst, and they're working with us. President Eisenhower of the United States met with a group of extraterrestrials at a place in California called Muroc Air Force Base in 1954. Muroc is now known as Edwards Air Force Base. It's one of our largest military facilities in California. Ike and his staff and a select number of people were there in '54, in April of 1954, when one of those extraterrestrial groups came in. They flew around the base 2 or 3 times. There were 3 of them. They were circular, rounded discs, and they were golden in color. They flew around the base. Over here on a hangar, Ike and his staff and a whole bunch of people were standing there waiting. These objects came over the runway. 2 of them hovered, I mean hovered over the runway. They never landed. They just hovered. Good size, 40, 50 feet in diameter. The other one came around and landed right in front of the hangar where Eisenhower and the reception group were waiting. Now, in that reception group was an archbishop from Los Angeles by the name of McIntyre. And I share this with you because I think it's rather humorous because of what happened. The meeting lasted 2 days. When it was all over with, the extraterrestrials, and I will refer to them as Anunnaki, which is an ancient Sumerian term, meaning those who came down from above, those who from heaven to earth came. And I use it in a generic sense because I use the term Anunnaki to apply to several of the groups, not just this one in particular. But they got back into their discs and they flew away. And that was the beginning. A couple of years later, another group comes and lands at Holloman Air Force Base. This second group was ones we refer to as the tall blondes. And they were from another place. And they sat and talked and got together. And they made an agreement to assist. So we've got an intimate relationship with 2 extraterrestrial intelligences that have technology that is so far beyond our own that we cannot even begin to imagine it. We have technology that they utilize that it's like magic to us. We literally are a primitive and a savage species here. We're just now beginning to stand up and look at the stars and make some plans for our future. We are just now beginning to realize that our warfare among ourselves, our tribal warfare, has got to come to a close. We've been told, literally, that we are not going to be allowed to go out into the stars until we get our act together here on the planet. We've got to stop warring against each other. This miserable, heartbreaking, bloody thing we've been going through for the last 100 years has got to stop. And they've made that point very clear, that we are not going to be allowed to come out there until we grow up and stop this adolescent tribal warfare foolishness. The planet Earth at the moment is under quarantine. They come and they go. They allow us to go to the moon. They allow us to go out in our little space station. They allow us to make these little tiny trips out there. We've put our satellites in there. We've even sent NASA programs off to Mars. We've even sent NASA ships off to Saturn. So we're making baby steps, little tiny baby steps, but we're not making any big steps. If those of you who's been following the news will know that NASA has decided that we're not going back to the moon. You know what the excuse is? We can't afford it. Poppycock. Balderdash. Nonsense. Of course we can afford it. We've literally been told to get the hell off and stay off. You're not going to be allowed to come back until you stop this nonsense and this foolishness. Do you know that our Air Force put nuclear weapons in orbit 20 years ago? And they said, no, you can't do that. So that's why we're not going back to the moon, fellas, because we have been told we cannot come back. We're not going to be able to go back to the moon until we grow up a little bit more. Now, this leads me to my commentary about an agency in my country that's known as NASA, NASA. I have a good friend, Richard Hoagland, who says that NASA stands for Never a Straight Answer. And I think he's right. They've been lying through their teeth to us for years. I was in Barcelona last July at a conference. Wonderful experience, beautiful people. A great conference, a lot of fun. At that time, during that Congress in Barcelona, the United States was celebrating 40 years of having put men on the moon. Oh, we were clapping ourselves on the back and we were strutting around and thinking, aren't we neat? Look what we did. Wow, wasn't that something? We went to the moon, guys, but they never told you what they found when they got there. 5 years ago, NASA admitted and had announced that they had inadvertently and mistakenly erased 40 rolls of film from the Apollo program. Now, look, you might mistakenly, inadvertently erase one roll. You might even inadvertently, mistakenly erase 2 rolls. You don't inadvertently and mistakenly erase 40 rolls. Well, these were all from the Apollo program. What in the world did they have on those rolls of film that they didn't want the public to see? Gee, guys, we're sorry. The film is gone. You know, we can't release it. The authorities in NASA had forgotten that they had signed a contract with the Japanese Space Agency at the beginning of the NASA program, the Apollo program, and there was some big money involved here. The Japanese Space Agency agreed under contract to buy every photograph, a copy, a print of every photograph NASA took in the Apollo series. And when they announced that they had mistakenly erased 40 rolls, they apparently had forgotten that they had sold the whole damn caboodle off to the Japanese in Tokyo. Now, some of those photographs are showing up. I was in Tokyo some years ago, and a friend of mine, a Japanese researcher by the name of Junichi Yaoi, said, "Look at here, this is a gift. A photograph taken by Apollo 13, 2 photographs taken by Apollo 13 on the way to the moon. The Japanese Space Agency had them. Well, I've got them, and I'm going to show them to you in a few minutes. And I think they're stunning. I really do believe those photographs are shocking. I just push the button here, what happens? Oh, well, that's not the first one. Okay, let's go. Okay, all right. There's good. I like to throw those pictures out, guys, because they set the stage for me. You know, they literally. I find those pictures inspiring because that's where we've all come from, and that's where we are all going again in time. The latest estimate we've had from our scientists is that there are over 100 billion stars in our galaxy. They've estimated that there are 100 billion galaxies in our known universe. And it's evidently overwhelmingly clear that the universe is literally teeming with advanced, intelligent life. And those pictures, for me, are gorgeous and beautiful. I catch my breath. I have a feeling of homesickness when I look at that, because I really know that I've been there, and I'm going back. We're all going back. We've all been there. Now, here we have an Apollo 11 photograph. This is the Apollo capsule. The picture was apparently taken from the lander, the Apollo lander, that was separated from the capsule, and it was getting ready to go down and land on the surface. And while they're separating the lander from the capsule, someone else flew by and expressed some interest in the goings-on there. This is a rather good-sized object. Not uncommon in its shape, but rather good size. Here's another one. NASA, Apollo 12, roll 50, negative 7346. And here's the moon. And here's another one of those chaps flying by, expressing interest. Here's another one. I like this one. Apollo 12, roll 51, negative 8553. Now, this is a good-sized object, and what I suspect was happening here is that the Apollo guys were in their little craft with their little cameras looking out of those little tiny windows, taking pictures of these guys. And I have the feeling that in that craft, there were guys in there with their cameras taking pictures of the Apollo guys. They show a great curiosity of what we're up to and what we're doing. Here's another picture in Landsberg again. And now this line is just a line that's been drawn there to denote the trajectory of this object. Here's a good-sized object that's flying by Apollo 14. And these guys are probably looking at Apollo 14 and saying, "What the hell are you guys up to?" Here's Landsberg. Looky there. What in the world is that? In the bottom of the crater of Landsberg. That's gigantic. That's several miles across. Old Carl Sagan used to say before he died, when you see symmetry, you see intelligence. Because nature generally is not that symmetrical. So if you see something that is symmetrical, you're looking at some form of intelligence. I look at that and it puzzles me because maybe it's my imagination, but it looks like the face of a skull. But it's not. It's just a gigantic artificial structure in the crater. But it does look like with 2 eyes, mouth, But then again, that's only my vivid imagination. Another object several miles across in the bottom of one of the craters on the moon. There's all kinds of activity going on up there. It's no wonder they want to say, you know, get the hell off and stay off. You guys can't come back till you grow up. Now here is a picture taken by Neil Armstrong. A cigar-shaped object flying past the capsule. Now, this is Apollo 11. They were up there before they landed, and there's all kinds of traffic taking place. These guys were really curious. Are they going to manage to pull it off? Are they going to make it? You know, it's like a bunch of children on a playground. They're going to fall down and scrape their knee. Well, they watch. They don't interfere normally. They only interfere from time to time, and they've interfered over the centuries. You know, you're familiar with the old Star Trek thing about the Prime Directive? Non-interference, poppycock. There is no such thing as the Prime Directive. These guys interfere when it suits them. And they do interfere from time to time. Literally, they brought about the end of the Cold War by interfering. They literally brought about the end of the Soviet Union by interfering. And I hope we'll have time to touch upon that. Now, here we are. This is one of them from the Japanese Space Agency. There's some Japanese writing here at the bottom. This was Apollo 13. They're on the way to the moon. And there's a lot of heavy traffic going on out there. Here's a fairly large object, a disk with a dome. Another object, and then on the right-hand side, coming into view, is this object. Here's the positive, here's the negative. Ladies and gentlemen, they refer to this as the Big Mother. That Big Mother is 5 miles long. Now, during my son's career, he spent 12 years on aircraft carriers, and I had the opportunity to go on aboard a couple of the carriers that my son served on. And I was in a state of shock at American nuclear aircraft carriers, the ones they call the Nimitz class. They're nuclear powered. They can go to sea and they can stay at sea for years. These carriers are carriers 1,000 feet long. They have 80 to 100 aircraft, and they have a complement, a crew aboard a Nimitz carrier of over 5,000 men. Now that, to me, is staggering. 5,000 men on one aircraft carrier. We've got 11 of those damn things. God, I hate to think how we've paid for them. We're probably still in debt. But I look at this Big Mother, and I think 5 miles long, what can you imagine could be going on up there? Well, it's obviously what you would call a spaceship carrier, because here at the end here are these little circular, apparently disc-shaped objects that are flying off the front of this thing, and I suspect this is a saucer carrier. But I have no idea the crew that could be aboard something that large. On the nuclear aircraft carrier, on the Nimitz and the others, you know, they have a soda fountain and they have a little shop where you can buy this and that. They have, the guys between shifts can grab a sandwich or something like that. On this thing, I could imagine, you know, there are parks, bowling alleys, restaurants. God, what could be going on aboard this thing? 5 miles long. They may not need the large crew that we have on the Nimitz and all those. You know, we have 5,000 men on one ship. They could probably function there with, you know, a few hundred. But then again, maybe lots of guys aboard that thing. Now here's the second photo in the series. That Big Mother, which you see over here just coming into view, is now in the center of the frame here. Here's the moon. Here's these other two objects. And there's the big mother, smack dab in the middle again. There's the positive, there's the negative. There's the two circular things that I suspect are probably disks. But God, I find that astounding to me, stupefying to me. I've been aware that they're here. I've been aware that they're in our midst. Ladies and gentlemen, I have met some of them face to face. And that's something I seldom talk about because it's incredibly sensitive, as you can imagine. Retired military, you say that in public in my country, and they want to grab you and lock you up in the insane asylum. I have met several of them. They've introduced themselves to me at conferences. And there's one amusing story which I hope I have time to share with you. Anyhow, here we are. I mean, NASA again does a number of things fairly well. They build these little craft that they send out. And they go here, they go there, they take pictures. This was a photograph taken by Mariner 9 a number of years ago of an installation on Mars. Now, this installation is on the equator on Mars. Mariner 9 took the picture. It's referred to amusingly by the guys in NASA. They never released this damn thing, but they refer to it as the airport. And I jokingly say that here's the admin building here, here's the parking lot, here's the main terminal, and over here are the chutes where the craft pull in and dock. Well, it's not an airport, it's obviously a spaceport. It's on the equator. The Martians are very smart people. Actually, they're Anunnaki up there. And they know that when you launched to space, if you launch from the equator, you get the benefit of the rotation of the planet. Helps throw you out there. We've learned that the hard way a few times. That's a picture of Chicago, one of our largest cities. It's taken at night, little aerial picture there. I saw it in a magazine and I grabbed it because I had a purpose in mind. That is a picture of Chicago. That is a picture of a city on Mars the size of Chicago. Now, that city was taken by the Soviet Phobos mission a number of years ago, and it was taken in infrared. You can see the blocks, the streets, the city blocks. That thing is the size of Chicago, but it's under the surface. It's generating an enormous amount of heat, and the Phobos mission photographed that and a number of other things over the years. Pictures like this were given to me and other speakers some years ago by a lovely lady, by Marina Popovich. Marina was a cosmonaut. She was one of the Soviet Union's most decorated fighter pilots, and Marina became a cosmonaut. And she married a lieutenant general who was also a cosmonaut, Vladimir Popovich. Vladimir has gone to his rewards. I think Marina is still alive. But she was giving these pictures out at conferences. But there is a city on Mars under the surface, the size of Chicago, and can you imagine what could be possibly going on up there? Now, we're getting into some of the real nitty-gritty here. A number of years ago, I met and was able to develop a friendship with a retired NASA scientist by the name of Norman Berggren. Norman was with NASA long before it was even known as NASA. He's a delightful little man, only about 5'2", 5'3". Little pink cheeks, little bow tie. Brilliant, brilliant. He was a scientist with NASA. It seems that in the late 70s, some strange things were going on Saturn, in the rings of Saturn, among the moons of Saturn. There apparently was some traffic, some movement taking place, and NASA astronomers was curious about it. So they put together what they call the Voyager program. And they sent Voyager 1 off to Saturn in 1980. And they took a whole bunch of pictures. And when they got them back, they were stunned at what they found. They didn't know how to react. They found that not only had there been some goings-on up there within the rings of Saturn and among the moons, but they never released them. And Norman expected them to release them because, you know, the American people paid for them. But the Voyager pictures from Voyager 1 were never released, and Norman retired, disgruntled, pissed off, if you'll pardon my French. Little guy was really angry about it. So when he retired, he took some of the photographs with him. And he wrote a book about what they had seen, what they had photographed, and what they had determined was going on in Saturn. And Norman wrote this book, The Ring Makers of Saturn, and he couldn't get it published in the United States. No American publisher would even talk to Norman Berggren about it. He had to go off to Aberdeen, Scotland, for God's sake, to get his book published, which he did. He paid for it out of his own pocket. I introduced him at a conference, at the Bay Area Conference at San Jose a number of years ago. Norman got a standing ovation. He brought 2 little boxes of books with him. I think 50 books to a box. He sold every book, which was rather astounding because they cost $50 a pop. Yeah, it's not a cheap book, but once they saw the photographs that I showed on the screen and introduced Norman and told them what the hell they were seeing out there, every book he had was sold. Now, this is one of the photographs. This is the one on the cover. Here's one of the rings of Saturn. As you know, if you know anything about Saturn, there's a whole bunch of rings out there. They've got them labeled the A ring, the B ring, and so on and down. They go out 20, 30 different rings. But here's the object that caused all of the consternation to NASA. This object is roughly the size of our moon. Now, our moon has a diameter of 2,160 miles. I've often wondered, is there any coincidence to the idea that an astrological age is 2,160 years? Suppose there's a coincidence there? An age of the Piscean age, which I was born in, which is coming to an end, 2,160 years. Diameter of our moon, 2,160 miles. Oh, got to be a coincidence. Anyhow, this object, size of our moon, self-luminous, obviously under intelligent control, and it's moving around all among the rings and the moons of Saturn. The NASA guys were really quite perturbed about that. And here we go. This is even more magnificent. Here's another ring. Now this ring looks to be unfinished. Now Norman told me that NASA scientists were determined that they're making the rings. Now this object here is an artificially constructed object that is 2,000 miles long. Now, I said to Norman, I said, you know, I'm an amateur here, and the NASA expert says they're making the rings. I said, did it ever enter their minds that they could be mining the rings? You see, the rings are apparently, from what we've determined, rich in nutrients. I mean, the minerals, the water in the rings. My God, you can go into the ring and you got, put out the scoops and bring in all these minerals and all that water. If you're really an advanced civilization, you could use that. Well, I said they're probably they're probably mining the rings. And Norman said, that's a pretty good point. Maybe that's what they were doing up there. But this object is 2,000 miles long. And Norman says it's in his book. And you might find a copy if you were to go to, one of the big booksellers. Amazon might have it, might find it for you. I imagine it'll cost a little more now, but it's very rare. It's really a collector's item now. But here is another large, independent, artificial object. This appears to be a jet of some kind, form energy. Norman seems to think this might be a factory of some kind. The thing is 450 miles in diameter, 2,000 miles long. I think they're mining the damn ring. This ring is filled with riches. But when you really stop to think about what's going on out there, ladies and gentlemen, there's enormous traffic going on out there. Heavy traffic. We run into it on the way to the moon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's in our skies. I mean, they're up there all the time. But what the hell? They're down here among you. Yeah, I would almost bet $50, and I'm not a fool. There's one of them in the audience. Now, don't start looking around at each other, looking suspicious. But I have never, ever been to a conference where there wasn't at least one and perhaps two national security agents in the conference. And then I met these two at Laughlin, Nevada 2 years ago, and they walked up and introduced themselves to me. You know what? They attend conferences like this, not to listen to speakers like me. They attend conferences like this to monitor how guys like you respond to speakers like me. They want to know your response. They watch you carefully. They want to know how you respond to some of the things you're hearing here at this conference. They went to Laughlin, Nevada. They've been at the conferences at the Bay Area Conference in San Jose. They're everywhere. I had one walk in and visit me in my office in Tucson, Arizona when I was with the Sheriff's Department some years ago. Walked in and spent 35 minutes chatting with me. Sat down, lovely young man, looked like he was about 40. Pleasant conversation. The two at Laughlin came up to me, congratulated me on a presentation, told me how much they appreciated hearing some of the things I had to say. I'm standing there at the coffee break looking at them, and I had a gut feeling. I have an intuitive sense, which I've learned to develop over the years. And I thought, oh, there's something here, something wrong, something's not quite right. We conversed about 15, 20 minutes, and they're very charming, a male and a female, and they look like a husband and wife. And after about 15 minutes, I looked at him and I said, I don't know why I said it, but I said, you guys aren't from here, are you? She got a big grin on her face. She really, big smile. She looked at me with that lovely smile and she said, no, we're not from here. And I felt embarrassed. I felt embarrassed. I said, well, I didn't mean, from New York or Los Angeles or Seattle or wherever. No, I didn't mean that. She says, I know what you meant. You guys are really not from here. And she said, smilingly and sweetly, no, we're not from here. And I said, fools that I was or am, where the hell are you from? And she smiled. She smiled sweetly, and she says, if I were to tell you where we're from, you wouldn't understand. And she didn't say it in a critical way. She didn't say it in a sense to embarrass me. It was a straightforward remark. She says, if I were to tell you, you really wouldn't understand. And I got the gut feeling that they were from another dimension. Now, a year later, I'm speaking at the Bay Area Conference, and so help me, she comes across the room. Same lady, big smile on her face. He didn't seem to be there. I didn't see him at all. She came up to me with a big grin and she says, "They didn't believe you when you told them, did they?" And I said, "No, they didn't believe me when I told them." But I'm sharing this with you because I'm serious. I feel strongly that this is important. I feel strongly that we have got to expand our consciousness to understand that we are a tiny part of almost an infinite universe filled with life. And it's a glorious universe. Phobos 2, the Soviet spacecraft. While they're looking at Phobos and looking at Mars, this object comes up from the planet's surface and bumps Phobos 2, bumps it pretty hard and knocks it out of orbit. And, that's the end of the photo session. This thing came up from the surface. This is the surface of Mars down here. But here it is. It's one of the last pictures Phobos was able to get, the Phobos 2. Now, Phobos was named after one of the moons of Mars. Mars has two moons, Phobos and Deimos. Now, Phobos itself is about 12 miles in diameter. The Soviets were interested in it because they think it's artificial. The European Space Agency has apparently taken pictures, and just recently the word is out that the European Space Agency has also determined that Phobos, the moon of Mars, is also artificial. But it's only 12 miles. I mean, that's a little tiny thing, The United States has, and I'm proud to say this because I know a number of them, the United States has a group of military remote viewers. They called it Project Stargate some years ago. And these guys are intuitive, skilled, very bright. They remote view. They send their consciousness out and they look at anything they want to look at. Well, our military remote viewers for a number of years have been peeking in on the alien presence on the planet, and they have determined that there on this planet are a number of major extraterrestrial facilities on the planet, where they have apparently been for one hell of a long time. This is the Northern Territory of Australia. This is Alice Springs. This little X marks the spot of a location of a facility known as Pine Gap. Pine Gap is one of the largest, probably the largest, national security agency facilities on planet Earth. The NSA is one of our most secretive agencies. Well, NSA has a facility at Pine Gap, and apparently right underneath the Pine Gap facility is a gigantic extraterrestrial facility. Now, I'll throw a little humor here because the remote viewers peeking in and confirming each other's views have determined that at Pine Gap, the alien facility is a facility for R&R. Now, R&R is a military term in the United States. It means rest and relaxation. And if you're a combat soldier and you're in the middle of a war, from time to time they pull you off the line and they send you back to the rear, wherever, where you can, have a bath, a decent meal, a couple of beers, you can relax and unwind. That's known as R&R, rest and relaxation. Well, the remote viewers said, so help me God, they've determined that Pine Gap underneath is an alien R&R facility. And I've concluded, and this is not humor here. Listen, guys, if you're dealing with human beings, you need rest and relaxation sometimes. If you're an advanced extraterrestrial intelligence and you're messing with us, as Stephen Hawking called us, an advanced breed of monkeys, you need R&R. Well, apparently that's what's going on underground at Pine Gap. Ah, underneath a mountain in southeastern Alaska is a mountain we call Mount Hayes. There's a gigantic alien facility underneath Mount Hayes in Alaska. Ingo Swann, one of our most talented remote viewers, one of our most talented psychics, was taken to Mount Hayes by a senior official from the Central Intelligence Agency a number of years ago. They didn't get inside the mountain, but Ingo said it scared the hell out of him because they've got this activity going on there and they're pretty careful about keeping it covered up. People, they have been here for thousands of years. Zechariah Sitchin, who I know many of you are familiar with, brilliant Hebrew scholar. Zechariah turned 90 this year. I admire him and respect him. Someone asked him one time, when were the Anunnaki coming back? And Zechariah says, what makes you think they ever left? They haven't. They're still here. They've been here all along. But here's Mount Hayes. Okay, let's go on. Now here's interesting, you know, everybody knows about what the hell's going on in Zimbabwe. There's a nitwit nutcase by the name of Robert Mugabe. And if there's any Zimbabwean in the audience, I apologize. But Robert Mugabe he ought to be locked up in an insane asylum. Zimbabwe, underneath the ground at the edge of Zimbabwe here, is an alien facility, which apparently is one of the oldest. The Anunnaki go back in Africa at least 200,000 years. A brilliant researcher by the name of Tellinger has disclosed that they have now discovered in South Africa gold mines with tools still inside of them that date back over 200,000 years. And Lloyd Pye will be fascinated about that. You may know Tellinger. Anyhow, here we go. Now, good people, España. Mount Perdido in the Pyrenees is one of the major active extraterrestrial facilities on the planet. It's been there for several thousand years, right here in your own country. Now, I do not advise you to get your hiking boots and get your packs and go up and start going up Mount Perdido. I wouldn't advise that at all, because it's very clear, and it's happened repeatedly, that people who have gone up Mount Perdido, nosy, looking around, seeing what they can find, somehow seem to disappear. A lot of Spaniards have been lost on Mount Perdido. So don't, do your homework, do the study, look into it. It's fascinating. It's your country right up here. But I wouldn't advise you to trek up there anytime soon. Okay, now here is one of the more recent pictures from Saturn. Here are some of the rings. Here's another big mother. Now this was photographed by the Cassini spacecraft. And this was photographed within the last 5 years. You see, NASA is still interested in the rings of Saturn because of these big mothers out there. I haven't heard an estimate on the size of that one, but it's a pretty good size one. Here you see a shadow from it. It's moving around, it's obviously. The NASA calls them electromagnetic vehicles. And poor old Norman, he expected them to release it. They didn't. He did it himself at a considerable expense. But I think he sold every book he had. Here's another one. Look, these rings are beautiful. But here's another big mother. I would say that's probably a couple of thousand miles long. Now, we're looking, excuse me, I have to do this. I start talking about my favorite subject, I get a little dry. On top of that, I'm violating my national security oath. So whenever I do that, my mouth gets a little dry, because I'm still suffering under the threat of 10 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. But here we are, a big mother in the rings of Saturn. Now, I almost feel emotional when I look at that picture. This is our mother. Our ancestors called her Gaia. She's a goddess, Gaia, goddess of life. I conclude, and many other people have concluded, that this beautiful lady is alive. She is a living creature. She has a heart. She has a respiratory system. She has a circulatory system. She's our blessed home, our mother. But let me tell you what they think of her. And I've gotten this from some of the highest authority. Take my word for it. I didn't come 5,000 miles to lie to you. She's looked upon by them out there as the ripest and the richest zoological garden in this quadrant of our galaxy. She is ripe and rich. And if you think I just told you guys you're living in a zoo, you are. This zoological garden is one of the richest and ripest in the galaxy. It appears that the flora and fauna on this beautiful lady is almost infinite. You guys are part of the fauna. You're in the zoo, fellows. Now, that leads to some smart remarks and some nasty comments and one thing or another. But I think that aside from the humor of it, aside from Stephen Hawking saying we're an advanced breed of monkeys, I don't find that I'm offended by the idea that I am a part of the fauna of this lovely zoo. Matter of fact, I find it rather amusing. I'm at that stage in my life, you know, from Shakespeare. He had his histories, he had the drama, he had the tragedies, and then he ended up with his comedies. Well, I'm at that point in my life where I'm at the comedy stage, you see. Every time I go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and I look at the mirror and I see myself, I break down and start laughing. Now, when you can look at yourself naked in the mirror and laugh at yourself, then you're pretty well balanced, I think. But it's part of the humor, you know. I don't get a lot of fun games in my life. I'm 81, for God's sake. So, you know, I don't go out and have lots of fun and games. But so if I can get my fun and games just by peeking at myself in the mirror when I'm on the way to the bathroom, it's, you know, cheap entertainment. Doesn't cost me anything. But this is a beautiful, beautiful planet, and we have not treated it well. As I say, she's alive. I believe that. I believe the universe is alive. I'm convinced, and I know this as a fact, that we are immersed in an ocean of conscious intelligence. And I've done a lot of remote viewing of my own in the last few years. I've had a number of out-of-body experiences. I had 2 near-death experiences, a number of out-of-body experiences. I call them excursions, where I literally have gone out there. And let me tell you, some of you, I'm sure, have done the same thing. And you may do it every night when you have a dream. You may leave and go out and have all kinds of experiences. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not telling you something you don't know. I feel to some extent that being here with you today, I'm preaching to the choir, as it were. Because I know that most of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and many of you are a hell of a lot farther along the way than I am. But you are not, thank you, you're not a human being having a spiritual experience. Teilhard de Chardin said some years ago, you are a spiritual being having a human experience. And I would say to you, enjoy every moment of it. It's incredibly brief. You come here, you incarnate here, you get into a human body, you're born, you grow up. You get 70, maybe 80, even if you're lucky or unlucky, you'll get 90 years. Old Zechariah turned 90 this year. But you are an immortal, infinite spiritual being having a temporary human experience. And you come to this planet and you incarnate here because planet Earth is one of the best damn schools in the galaxy. It's a rough school. It's a tough school. And if you can come to planet Earth a number of times and succeed and learn and grow, they give you a little silver certificate. I'm not joking. It's happened to me. I want a gold certificate, but they only gave me a silver certificate. I've been around a long time. I've probably had a couple of hundred lives here. You'd think I really would have gotten it worked out so I wouldn't come back again, but I came back this time to see old friends and to learn a little more. And I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons I'm still here and walking around and standing in front of you on this stage this morning is that I have felt this obligation to share with you what I have seen and what I have learned. Because it's important. I have concluded after my 81 years of life, of all the things I could share with you, what I could say, there are two things. I've learned that there is no death. Death is an illusion. The body dies, but you don't. And I've learned probably the most important thing of all of my schooling on planet Earth. There is a God. There is a Creator. And it is loving and it is caring. And it has put to place a cosmic law called karma. And an old friend of mine in Galilee 2,000 years ago tried desperately to communicate some of these things. And he says, what you sow, you reap. Down to the last, it says in the Bible, to the last jot and tittle. It took me several years to figure out what the hell a jot and a tittle was. I finally found out. A jot is a little tiny mark that they put above certain Hebrew letters in the Hebrew alphabet. A tittle was a little tiny coin, which was about 1/10 of a shekel. So when Yeshua from Galilee said, you reap what you sow, down to the last jot and tittle, that's a fact, that's a cosmic law. And our Creator, our source, put that law in effect, and we're all living under that law. Now, I've been told that I'm running out of time. Happens all the time. I haven't even gotten to half of the things I wanted to share with you. Forgive me, I have this big mouth. I've been babbling away here. I didn't get to some of the history of it. But guys, you're living in incredible times and you're here. Your being here is not an accident. You chose to come. You chose to come to serve and to learn to love. And I believe that the very nature of why you're here this afternoon tells me that you guys are well along the road. You know what love is. I've had more love shared and given to me in the last 3 days here in Madrid than I've had in the last 5 years. Well, I take that back. They did the same thing to me over in Barcelona. You Spaniards are wonderful people. You wear your heart on your sleeve. You give. You gave to me. I want to give back to you. There's something I want to share with you before I leave. As I said, you're going through this transition, this transcendent transformation into another species. The last 100 years has been pure hell on this planet. I'm a child of the 20th century. My God, my dad was in World War I. My dad's brother died in France in World War I. The last 100 years has been pretty painful. I have a grandson who's dying in Kansas for injuries he received in Iraq. He's 100% disabled. He's only 33 years old. But I want to tell you that the difficulties are not over yet. There are some rough times yet ahead. I mean, with volcanoes, tidal waves, earthquakes. Look at the heartbreak of Haiti. Look at the wars going on in Afghanistan and still in Iraq. We're not over that mess yet. Things are going to be difficult in the next few years, and I want you to face the future with some courage and love. And when it's getting difficult, and when it's dark, and it's night, and you're feeling alone sometimes, I want you to remember something. I want to leave a quote with you from one of my more favorite authors, Count Leo Tolstoy. He said, "There is something in the human spirit that will survive and will prevail. There is a tiny and brilliant light burning in the heart of man that will not go out no matter how dark the world becomes. And in the spirit of that light, I want to say, God bless you. I love all of you. Learn to love each other more. Vaya con Dios. Good night." Thank you for everything. An old Hindu friend of mine. Am I still on? An old Hindu friend of mine told me one time, he taught me this little gesture. I wondered what it was all about. He says, it's a simple thing. He says, it simply says that the deity within me salutes the deity within you. And there is a spark of pure divine deity within each and every one of you. God bless you and good night.